Okay, bro. Okay.
Good evening, everyone. So, as a continuation for our Java learning, so currently we are there with Spring Boot. Okay. So, let me share my screen. Are you guys able to view my screen? Yes, I think. Are you guys able to view my screen?
Yes. Yes, Guru, bro.
Okay, yeah, fine. So there's a common topic between Spring and Spring Boot. Just we'll go through this IOC, okay, inversion of control. But this is a container in the Spring. So the container is the one is at the core of the Spring framework. So it is a core actually everywhere the container. So the container will create the objects, wire them together, configure them, and manage their complete life cycle from the creation till destruction. So if you see like any Spring framework, there's a container will be there which will be taking care of the complete life cycle of the beans. Okay, so in the main that, so creating the objects and wiring the objects in the sense like making the dependencies. So yesterday we have seen that. So in case of the regular like standalone programs to mark as a dependency, what we will do is we will try to create the object like explicitly. Okay, but in case of the Spring, the dependency injection, we no need to do all those things. Just like with the annotation representation, we can do that. There are different set of categories like we can define all those. Either XML based also we can do, or else annotation based also we can do, or else standalone the Java level also we can do. But the Spring Boot works purely on annotation based. So just by defining one annotation, you no need to explicitly create the object. So that object creation, everything will be managed by the container. So the wire them together in the sense the dependency injection, right? So wherever we are mentioning as a dependency, it will bring there, okay, and it will do the configuration. So all the configuration whatever is required, so everything will be done. So and it will take care creating the objects until deletion of the object. So everything will be managed by the container. Okay. So the Spring container uses the DI to manage the components that make up an application. So dependency inversion, like dependency injection, to manage the components that make up an application. So between the components, right, the dependencies will be managed by the containers. These objects are called beans, which we will okay. So everything like every class, like the high level, it will be treated as beans actually in Spring. So Spring Bean classes. The container gets its instructions on what object to instantiate, configure, and assemble by reading the configuration metadata provided. So as part of our application, we will know like there's a class A is there, so it requires class B. So we need to instruct like the container like, okay, this is the object is required here. So you need to create that and you need to bind it. So you need to provide that particular object here. So these are all the things will be provided as part of the configuration metadata. Okay. The configuration metadata can be represented either by XML or Java annotations or Java code. This is what I mentioned. Right? So means like the container should know like what it is. So the indications between the signals between the application containers happening either by XML configuration or by Java annotations or by Java code. Okay? So the following diagram represents a high-level view of how Spring works. So basically, like the Spring AWS container makes use of the Java POSO classes and configuration metadata to provide a fully configured and executable system or application. So it's a fully of POSO classes will be there. From there, like based on the metadata, the Spring container works and it loads, and finally it will bring up the ready to use application. So everything will be managed by the container itself. So it uses the POSO classes and it takes the input as a metadata like now the configuration, and then it will bring up the application. Okay, so in case of the containers in the Spring, there are two types of containers. Okay, one is Spring Bean Factory container. So this is the one I mentioned, right? So everything will be representing as a beans here. So this is a bean factory container is it. So this is the simplest container, providing the basic support for dependency injection. Okay. Basically, if you want to get like any bean object, okay, we will use the bean factory container. Okay. So that is a high level interface which is implemented. We will see like how it is under. Another type is more interface specific functionalities, such as like textual messages from a properties file and the ability to publish application events to interested event means there is the listeners are there like, so listeners means like they are looking for some particular events. So whenever that event is happened, they will try to perform something. So all these kind of functionalities will be provided by the application context container. So there is a bean container is a bean container purely creating the bean objects and providing those bean objects and all. And what are the functionalities required for the bean factory will be provided by the application context container. Okay. So we'll see like as a one example. So how this bean context container is a, yeah, this is how like it makes. So configuration I mentioned, right? Spring configuration metadata. So either it can be XML based or annotation based or Java based. So in case of the XML based, we will define like this. So this is the bean, this is the ID of that particular one. And well, like what kind of initialization it is required, late initialization or like early initialization. What is the init method? What is the destry method? So all these kind of things, this is how like metadata we will provide as part of the configuration. Yes. This is Spring IOC. So what it is, it's fully working based on the metadata, like either XML or Java or annotation. So any kind of thing we can pass. So how it is automatic beans. So just by representing, it will provide everything. So automatic beans means either we will define as a component, service, repository. These are all the main automatic beans available in Spring Boot. So I will tell you what is the significance of all these annotations in the coming slides. So if you want to specify any bean explicitly, we'll be using the @ bean annotation. Okay, so it will take this metadata as the input and it will perform all these kind of things, will provide all these things, then it will provide the fully configured system. So this is outcome, this is income. So it will take this as an input and it will do all the required configuration and it will provide the outcome as fully configured system. Okay. So beans like, so what is a beans like? So object that is instantiated, assembled, and otherwise managed by Spring IOC container. So generally, these are the ones like no treated as objects, which will be managed by the container itself. Okay. So there's a dog class they have defined. Public class dog implements animal. So there's a constructor. This is kind of simple poser class, like there will be getters and setters. Poser class in the sense, what it will be having, it will be having the fields and setters and getters for each field on constructor. Okay. So bean declaration, how it can be done is, so this is the one, like in case of any Spring Boot, the main application, the starting point will be there like this. So application name. So what are the application you will define? So that is annotated as Spring Boot application. Okay, that's the starting point. So whenever we are running your Spring Boot, here there is a main method will be there. That main method will get run. If you want, I mentioned that if you want to specify any bean class explicitly, we need to use the @bean object. @bean annotation. Okay. This is a bean declaration, like how it will be get dog. So what it will do, it will give the dog object. So this is how, like, from the factory level, it will happen. See, this is the main application actually. So whenever you are creating any Spring Boot application, there will be one main class will be there, which will be annotated with Spring Boot application. That is the starting point. So it will be having the main method. So as we know that, like any class, the execution starts with the main method. So that's where, like, you can see main method here. And within that main method, there is a run function will be there. Spring application dot run. Okay. So this is how, like, Spring Boot application looks. Here, see, if you want to get any dog object, how I'm getting from the bean factory, just bean I'm calling. So I can able to get the dog object here. So I'm not doing like new dog and all, like, so I'm not creating any object explicitly here. Based on the container, I'm just asking the container, I need this object. So I will pass that as argument. So what is dog.class? So it means that, so whenever you are calling the factory.getBean means, and for what, which class, like I need the object, which object I need, that will pass as argument. Accordingly, the container, what it will do is, it will load and it will provide that particular object here. So based on that object, directly we can work here. So if you see, we did not create any object here. That's all, like, dependency injection works in Spring Boot. So in case of the standalone programs, if I want to use like dog object here, how I used to do, animal dog is equal new dog. So we used to do like that. But because there is a containers are in place with the Spring, so that will be providing all the required things for us. That's why just I can get like, so whatever the bean object I required, so directly I can call get bean. It will provide the particular object. So based on that object, what and all the functionalities are implemented in the bean class, I can able to call. Okay. So we mentioned that the beans, right? So what is the life cycle of the bean? So first thing is instantiation. It's nothing but creating an object for the bean class. So then post that, the properties and all will get set. So as I mentioned, most of the places the POSO classes are there, right? Through the setters, all the properties will be set. Okay. Then after that, there will be a name will be set for that particular bean. Then application context will be set for that. Then, so if you see in case of any containerized, there will be pre-deploy or pre-initialization, post-initialization, pre-destroy, post-destroy. Means pre-initialization means before I'm initializing this particular bean, if I want to perform some kind of task, those can be defined in the pre-initialization things. Okay. And then initialization. So here actual initialization takes place. Then if I want to do something post-initialization, so those things will be defined in the post-initialization phase. Okay. Then like once everything is done, then that's where the bean is ready. So once bean is ready, and it can be destroyed anytime. Okay, even in that also pre-destroy and post-destroy, like, so that we can be different. Pre-destroy can be different here. So before going for the destroy, I want to do something means we can define as part of annotations. Okay. So if you see the life cycle, first instantiation is happening means the dummy object is getting created here. The properties getting set. Then there is a name is getting set for that. And then there's a application context is setting for that. Then pre-initialization means before the initialization, if I want to perform any of the things, those will be carried as part of the pre-initialization. Then actual initialization of the bean takes place here. Okay. So then post-initialization something is required, we can define. So those actions can be performed post-initialization. After performing all these things, the actual bean is ready actually. So whenever the bean is ready, it's available and it can be destroyed like anytime. So generally like that is happen whenever the container is going down. So that time all the beans will get destroyed. Okay. This is all just like defining like for the bean level. So what is the destroy method? So I can keep it destroy. And what is the initialization method? So that is init. So in any case, if we want like any customization, like we can define for this init method, initialization, all these things can be defined actually. So this is how the bean is defined here. Here I am closing the context. So this is close means the container itself I am closing. So application context container, which is responsible for starting the application. Then I'm running the application. Then I'm closing the application. So whenever we close this one, it will get destroyed. So if you see here, so in case of here, I have defined through annotation like what is a destroy method. So if you want to give like our own, so these things we can define. So this is my bean explicitly I'm doing. So I can define like what is init method. Init method is for the initialization. And what is the destroy method? So I can define all these things. See, here is the actual class dog implements animal. So there is a constructor. So instantiation. So then initialization is happening through the init method. So I have defined it as part of the constructor, the bean constructor. So I can define like, so initialization and destroy is happening from here. So like that, if you want like any other actions to be performed, we can define any of the method. That method we can map for any destroy method or initialization method or pre-initialization method or post-initialization. So according to our application requirement, we can choose and we can perform all those actions. So accordingly, we can define our bean here. So now what I've done, so I've created like one init method and one destroy method. Okay, and there is a one default constructor. So as part of this, if you see idly, what I'm doing, I'm first instantiating, then I'm initializing, then I'm destroying. So for identifying this one, I need to provide instruction, right? Okay, whenever you are going to create the bean object for the dog class, so what and all you need to consider. So those things under here I'm mentioning. So at the red bean. So if you want to destroy, you use this one during the destroy time, and init method, you use a init method. So if you want to keep like any of our customization code, we can keep it in the init, we can keep it in the destroy. So before closing something or before initializing something, anything like we can map in this way. So whenever the object is created and it's got called, so first it will get the default constructor, then it's initializing and destroying. So automatically it will get called as part of the flow. Okay. So these are the scopes actually. So the default scope is always singleton. Singleton, these are like there are the three requests are there. There is only one object is present. Okay, singleton means make sure only one object will be there, which will be serving for all the requests. Okay, that's how it happens. And generally, like it's used in the stateless. Stateless in the sense, like every request it will treat as a new and independent. So it will not link between one and other. You're getting the point, right? So the stateful in the sense, like if I'm doing like any transactions, like the state should be remembered. So like whenever we'll get login for any e-cart, like we have selected a couple of the items and we have added to the cart. So I log out and again if I log in, so added cards and all should be shown for us. So that's how it captures the state of the object. That is called like stateful. In case of the stateless is, it will not capture anything. Simply like it will accept the request. It will do some action based on the request. It will send some response. That's it. It's a kind of like one-to-one, and it will not keep any record. It means for the request A, what and all I have done. So if again request A comes, like what I need to do. So the scope and like everything will not be captured in the stateless. Okay. So another is a prototype. So default is a singleton, the bean scope, but we can change to prototype. So that is a possibility is there. So that's where, like for each request, there will be one object will be there. So that will be maintained in the stateful. So that is how, in case of the stateless or stateful beans, there's the types of the beans like we can mention. By default, it is stateless. We don't need to mention anything explicitly. So whenever the request is coming, it listens for the request, it will process the request, and it will not maintain any session or any scope or anything for the process the request. It will forget it there itself. That's where stateless. So in case of the stateless, because only one object can serve for multiple requests, like simply accepting and processing, accepting and processing. But in case of the stateful, so there will be each request, there will be separate object will be there, and it maintaining the state of the particular object between multiple requests. Okay, so this is the scope for any bean class. Okay, so default it is stateless, and it can be make it as stateful. So another thing is MVC, Spring MVC. This is another core concept. Okay, so already we discussed this one. So Moodle V controller, it's a framework designed around a dispatcher that dispatches request to handlers. So dispatcher servlet is the one. So I mentioned, right, from view to controller, how the call goes. So that's where it dispatches from view to handler. So handlers are the one where the controllers actually. So we'll see the flow. So whenever we are sending the request, first dispatcher servlet will be there. It will text and it will find out the controller. So who is the controller for this particular request? So based on the URL. So then it will do the handler mapping. Then from handler mapping, it will go for the controller. So from the controller, again, it will go for the service. What service and all? Service is the one is the layer where complete business logic is present. So mean business logic in the sense where like purely dealing with the data, means the database. So then again, it will do some operation on the business logic and it will get back the response and it will provide output as a view. Okay. This view will be sent back to the handler adapter. So that will send back to the response. Okay. That's how, like if you take this regular controller, the input is the user action and the output is the view. This way, GUI means any UI, any Facebook or anything. Whenever we are hitting some button, so that we will take as a user action, that's a request. So that will be processed through the controller. It will do some changes on the database. It will get some content from the database and it will project as a view. Okay, that's where like while we are searching for someone, the particular person with the names what who and all are available, it will show. Once we will click on that particular person, it will take us to the particular person's profile. So that is the outcome. So the outcome is a view based on the request action. It is getting performed. So that's why finally it will respond back as the view actually. So that view, again, it deals with the model. It forms the response. That's why like MVC, the control for works actually. So web client like anywhere, like any Gmail or anything. So whenever the request is sending, controller takes that, the user action like, so it can be from view also, it can take the request means from UI. If some click is happened on the UI page, then controller works on the actual and the model. So means that in case of if you want to add any of the records, or if you want to create any of the record, or if you want to update any of the record, all such kind of things, via the GUI, we can provide like update password, change password. These are all some kind of like actions. So those things like either you can perform through the UI or like through API also can able to perform. So those will be listened by the controller, and controller takes that request and it will update on the model. So model is the one which is data layer. So means actual deals with the database. Means if it is a create request is coming, so we have seen in the REST API, right? So if any post request, something is coming for creating the new user, first it will take that, it will do the validations the controller. Then what it will do, it will deals with the model and it will update the model. Means it will create the new user in the database. So that's where like it manipulates the model. Then model will notify the controller. Yes, you're trying to perform some action, means you have asked for creating the new user and new user is getting created. So that again, it will update back to the view. So that's where the confirmation comes for us. And the same thing, it will go as a response. In case of the APIs, either it can be HTML, JSON, or XML. So if you see the REST API, what are the APIs we are doing? Previously, we were having all the web applications actually. So means all the UI pages will be there. So everything, whatever via the API endpoint, right? Create or update all these things, we were able to do via the GUI. So if you go by the GUI, this view is the one which is taking the complete control. So when we come for this microservices, all this kind of REST API kind of things, this view is completely gone. So that is purely handling by the HTTP request itself via the endpoints. So there, like where the payload is JSON or HTML or how this MVC control flow happens. So it started with the request either by API, so, or else user action. So then it takes it, it performs require the validations and all these things. Then it updates the model, and once model is updated, it will respond back to the request as a response. Okay. Then what are the controllers in this? Okay. So like any, let's take whatever we are having, like any entities. For those entities, we can define the controllers here. So for identifying it is a controller class, there is an annotation at the rate controller is used. Okay. So controller in the sense I have shown you, right? Any endpoints as this interface, starting interface. Okay, for the REST endpoints, whether it is a GET or it's a POST or it's a PUT, for all these things, the controller is the one which is the immediate contact. Whenever from the postman, when I hit one post request, directly server lands that particular request to map for any of this object here. So if you see in case of the getter, so the mapping is required here, request mapping. So request mapping in the sense that the URL you are providing from the HTTP URL you are forming, right? From REST API. So that's where the request mapping happens. So this is a /dog. So response body is a plain text. I can define. So if you see public string get dog homepage, so it will return I'm your dog page. So it's something for the getter implementation. This is how we need to implement in Spring Boot. So previously we have seen @get @post is a plain in case of the older. Let me show you that. How without Spring Boot and how is with Spring Boot. Yes. See, if you see here in the plain Spring, so for the post and all, simply it was there as a @post. Okay, then path I can define for which path and all it has to go. So the request mapping, it has to be there with the two different parameters or annotations. When it comes for the Spring Boot, so directly I can do get mapping. So means get mapping means this is the get method, and for that mapping the path I can define as /dog. So initially I was doing this one through two different actions. Let me get that. Yes. You see here, the get is there. So it is there without Spring Boot. It's just plain Spring. So in case of the Spring Boot, the mapping should be there. So request mapping, we should understand that like how the mapping happens. In case of the getter, we can see as get mapping. In case of the post mapping means what is the path as part of that, or else like along with the path, you can take like any other type. So it can get the request body or not. So what another query parameters it can get. So all these things we can define in the mapping itself. And this is the one actual action. So whenever the request is coming with this one, and it has to call this particular action, which is the action is get to dog homepage. Get to dog homepage is the actual action. And the returning rate, the response body. Response body, let's take, I've decided here as a plain text. So I am a dog page. So this is the plain text. This action is returning. Okay. Like that in case of the JSON. So here the JSON object will be formed and it will be returned back. So anything like according to the type, according to the response body is expected, we can convert to the required formats. So once post the server is running, so whenever I will just hit this one, so if you see the URL, what is there? The dog is there, the path, the get mapping, the request mapping is there. So this is the request, right? Localhost 8080/dog. This is the request. So localhost is the one where the server is running, where the Spring Boot application is running, and 8080 is the port, because Spring Boot is coming inbuilt with the Tomcat web server, right? So Tomcat web server uses 8080 as a default port. So that's what we represent server host name : port /request mapping. So request mapping is dog here. So whenever I call this dog, the application means internally the call comes here. It will look like where is the request mapping for the dog. That is there here. So then for this request mapping, what is the action I need to execute? So that is the action. It has to execute this one. So this action will return what type of the response body type. So accordingly, it will return that particular one. We can see as page. Like this, the complete flow happens through the controllers. Okay, you should understand this. These annotations are like no, it's a fixed lag, so we need to remember. Okay, so this is another lag. So get request. It's the same thing. There's a cat. So here, like there's a different type, like no, the HTML I'm giving. So there I have defined some HTML page that will be means it will be giving one view as the output. So view is nothing but HTML. HTML is GUI representation. Okay, it's the same. Like, let's look for any other type. So in case of the HTML, like what are all the things like, no, if you want to ask, so what is the cat name, what is the cat is, add cat. So anything can be done in this way. Means whenever the request is coming like this, what I'm doing, I'm returning one cat.html file. So that HTML file is having the output of just getting the name and age. So whenever they will click the add cat, again, that actual action will be happen and it will be stored into the database. So this is the straight away what we do, the post mapping. Post mapping. So action is add cat. So as part of the add cat, there are two request parameters that they are providing. If you see here, request parameter cat name and cat is right. See? Request param. One is the cat name, another is a cat age. So directly I can use these two things and I can add that particular cat into the database. So like this, the post request will be handled actually. So get we have seen and post also we have seen. So this is the request parameters as I said. So this one like it's kind of like redirecting. So again like /cat. Anything can be done like because of the URLs or else directly like instead of returning the redirection, you can completely perform that action. Yeah, that particular cat and just say response back that like, yes, it is done, something like that. So in this case, what I'm doing, just it is printing back that what is the cat name, what is the cat is. So it's just returning that. So this is like just model and view. So model with representation, if you're going, that can be set here. I'm a dog, HTML face. So any kind of things will be done. But generally now the view is not at all there as part of this. So all the microservices we are representing, right? So there is there other JSON format. So you send something, either get or post. In case of post creation, you will get the responses. Yes, it has been done. This is the fields we have set for the particular object. So like this, it will be working. So this is the one, another controller representation. So means the controller itself, I can do the request mapping. Okay, in such case, we will go for request mapping at the controller level. So means there's a parent path I will define. From that point onwards, I can use another level. So this is almost similar to, so see here, the path I have defined for this get method. So the request should have .import / user ID should be there. But to reach to the parent level, here I'm having v2 / users. So whenever you give here, means for the class level, this is the request mapping. Then v2 / users, if you want to give any other things, I will go for it. So if you see here, user endpoint, create user. See, v2 users. This is there at the class level. Means that is class level request mapping. Okay. So post this, if you have any other things from the method level, that will be followed as a parent path, then child path level. All these things. So means path / UID / .import, all these things will be .search as a continuation. We can take v2 users .search. If I want to search for anything, the endpoint comes like this. So that is how the mapping will be happening. So that is the significance of request mapping. So it can be done at multiple level, like is a class level also will give one request. So whenever the URL is having the /cat, so it identifies, okay, cat controller is the one which handles this request. Then within the CAT controller, if you have like many actions, so to identify each one individually, so we can provide another the path. So that is method level mapping. This is the class level mapping. This is method level mapping for the request. Okay, this is how we can done. And if you want to get any path variables as the input, those also will be fetched like this. Means I need cat object whose ID is this one. So in such cases, we will provide the cat ID. So with that, it will provide the complete object for the cat based on the ID. Okay. So another portion within the Spring Boot, the core portion is Spring Data. Spring Data is the one actual database. Okay, we have seen till now the controller wise we have covered the the view can be nowadays like either that can be GUI or API endpoints, means the browsers or Postman or any of the clients. Okay, those two parts are completed. View and controller. The main other thing is the model. Model is one which actually deals with the data. So that in the Spring Boot, there is a Spring Data is there. Spring Data that is used completely using the JPA. So Hibernate and JPA. Java Persistence APA. JPA stands for, which is internally uses the Hibernate as the implementation. Let's see like how that can be, that is implemented in Spring Boot. So there is a first database will be there. So this is the one actual database where the complete data is getting stored. Okay. From that, they have defined one repository. Okay. To interact with the database, they have to come through this repository. Let's see, like, so this repository deals with the entities. So this entities is nothing but every table will be represented as a one entity. Like user table is, that means user is a one entity. So like students are, that means one student is the entity. So like this, then there will be service layer will be there, which talks about the repository. Okay, so first database is there. From the database, like there should be repository to get the data from the database, and it maps for the entities. Then there will be service which talks with the repositories, and the service with it there as the models. Then this service talks to the controller. So this is the complete backend, how it works. Let's take, if any request is coming from view, from the controller, it passes to the service. The service will be having the models, what another data models are present, and those talks with the repository. This repository is having containing all the entities, means these entities are representing each table from the database. So this repository talks actually with the database. This is how, in case of the update, previously we were seeing the flow, right? Actual flow. So controller takes the request, it validates it, then ultimately it has to do the changes on the database, right? So this is how the flow goes. Controller to service, service to repository, repository to the actual database. And then the response comes back from database to repository. Repository will respond back to the service respect to the controller respond back to the view. So if you see, the complete backend is this one. All these things are as part of the backend. Okay. So there is another one. So application level properties are there. Okay. Properties means there is a one file is there, application.properties. So let me show you that. This is my Spring Boot application. Okay. So I just created from the Spring Initializer. So I did not write any class or any functionality in it. I just imported one Spring Boot project. Means this is the default Spring Boot project. So whenever I bring it, so there will be a file called under resources. application at properties. Okay, this comes as a default. So all the application properties and all we will set in this properties file. So what and all will be having the data source properties. This data source properties means which kind of database you are using, what is the driver class name, and what is the URL for the database, what is the username, what is the password for the database. All this data source related information, all the properties will be set in application of properties file. So along with that, there are some JPA properties also we can set. So what is a dialect, Hibernate dialect? According to the database, we will give. So here, everything talks about MySQL database. So this is an example of application of properties file where the database type is MySQL. So it's a MySQL server, which I'm using as a data store. In such cases, these are all the properties I need to set to deal with the MySQL database. So this application properties file should get all these entries. Okay, then only your Spring Boot application deals or talks with the database. Otherwise, it will not talk at all. So because it needs some information, right? So because you are telling there is a database is there, and actually the model or the data is storing into the database, that everybody knows that. But what is the database? What are its properties and all should be known for the application. So defining all those parameters or properties, there is a fixed place called application at properties. So this will be stored under resources folder. This folder structure is fixed, okay, for any Spring Boot application. So if you want to see like any application that properties in any of the Spring Boot application, you can go under the sources, under the main, then under the main, there are the resources will be there. Inside the resources, you can see application and properties file. So this is a static folder. Static folder means if your application is having any static pages, means like any HTML or JavaScript, CSS, such kind of static pages are there, that content can be stored into the static. And if any specific for the templates are there, from the templates you want to load like any of the objects and all, those all things can be placed into the templates. Okay, this is how the Spring Boot application, the structure is there. So I mentioned, right? So whatever the name I give for my project, with that project name, there will be an application class will get generated. See, that will be annotated as Spring Boot application. So this is the main class generates. So if you see already main method is there, that main method is starting the server. So I can directly run this one. When I run this one, there will be Tomcat will get started. So that's how like it's inbuilt. You don't need to do anything like explicitly. You don't need to start the Tomcat or you don't need to define all the Tomcat properties and all, or else like you don't need to write a sample code to print like hello world or something. So everything will be managed is ready-madely available for developing the microservices. That's where the structure of the Spring Boot is defined. So the significance of the application that properties file. So all the data source related and JPA properties will be defining inside this. So another is entities. So entity, if you see in the structure, yeah, there's a repository and everything is there in the format of entities, right? So that's where we'll see entity. So the entity is nothing but entity represents one table in the database. So as we know, there is a database there, but databases having the tables. In case of the SQL queries, directly we'll call select start from table, insert into the table, create table. All these kind of things will be there as a SQL language. But here we are not using any SQL here. So what we are using, we are representing whatever the table is there. For that particular table, there will be one entity Java class will be there. Okay.
So that's where all entities are nothing but tables in the database. So we can define, like if you want any customer's name, we can give any name. So for defining the entity, we need to use @entity annotation. Okay. And if you want like any specific name for this particular apart from the class name. So default, like it will take the class name as a table name. Okay, cat. If you want like something else, we can define @table name is equal cats. Okay. So yes, this is nothing but plain POSO class. POSO class means it's very simple. There will be set up the fields, means how many columns are there in a table. Those are, each column represents one field in the entity class. Okay, let's take in case of the student roll number, student name, student address, student branch, student age, student email, student phone number. So if you take all these things are part of the table in the database, means so each column it represents, okay, student name, student ID, all these things, right? So in the entity class, for each column, there is one field will be present. Okay. In case of the cat, there are only two fields I'm taking. So this ID is there, right? ID is on primary key. So for generating the ID default, we can define @ID annotation. @ID means, so this is the ID generation in the Hibernate level. So what it happens, the strategy how it generates is generated type identity. So automatically the values will get generated and it will be keep increasing. Means more cat object you are inserting into the database means the ID keep on getting increased in the sequence, and that's how the records will get stored into the cat table. Okay, and this name is it. For each one to get from the database or to set into the database, there will be getters and setters will be there. Means how many fields are there? For that many fields, there will be getter methods and setter methods. Getter method, what it will do, if I want to get the value of that particular field, so that's where we use the get method. Or else, if I want to set any value for that particular field, we will use the setter methods. So that's why getting the value, setting the value. That is the significance of the getters and setters. So what we do generally, if user is providing some input, right? We have seen the name and ID, right? So we'll come here, we'll create the cat object. Then for that cat object, through the setters, we will set the all the values whatever user is providing. Then we will save that cat object into the database. That is how it happens internally. Okay. So that is the entity. So another thing is repositories. So repositories is the one which directly talks with the databases. So this is the persistence layer that works with the entities, means either storing the entities or retrieving the entities or updating the entities. Here entity we can treat as a table representation. So for defining any entity in the Spring Boot, we need to use @repository annotation. Okay. So @repository annotation, we need to use. Okay. So it's very simple, like not to implement any repository into Spring Boot, because let me show you one of our. Yes. If you see here, this there is a customer entity is there, means customer database is there. The customer table. If I want to perform any of the actions in it, I will create one repository for it. So it deals with the customers. So to provide all such kind of implementation, so it's inbuilt actually in Spring Boot. You just extend this JPA repository. That's it. Everything will be managed. You don't need to write anything explicitly, because Spring Boot is coming with that kind of ready-made. ready-madely available features. So previously, we used to write all these entities and loading the entities and populating all the fields for the entities. And then we used to write till the saving the entity into the database. So that everything was managed by the source code, means application itself. But when it comes for the Spring Boot, it is everything is that inbuilt. So you are giving from application properties all the database related information. Directly, it will be connecting with the database, and what the entities will be defining in your application. Any entities will be created in the database automatically. So this everything is managed by the application. So that's how it works actually. So then for each entity, you can define one repository. Means, so what are the features it is providing is like find all by ID, find by name, so save, find, all such kind of function means either getting the fields, updating the fields, or creating the fields, or all these kind of things will be ready-madely available from JPA repository. Okay, so this JPA repository is inbuilt. So from entity level, we will not do anything much. Directly, wherever you require, you just use this customer repository dot save or customer repositories dot find all by ID or find by name. So directly you will get all the values actually. It's very simpler in the implementation. So if you see that there are the arguments are there for JPA repository. So JPA repository is the standard from Spring Boot itself. Okay. If you see here, everything is there from Spring Boot itself. We don't have anything else much apart from that. So we have only wherever the entity is there, right? This is the entity class. That entity is customer. Means that is the customer table. For the JPA repository, you need to pass arguments as, okay, what is the entity you are working? Means you are defining a repository for which table. So the table name we need to provide here. And what is the type of the primary key in that particular table? So that will define as integer. Means that is the ID.
Your voice is not clarity.
Was it? Is it better now?
Sir, your voice is very low, sir. Low clarity, low voice.
It is the same for everyone? Or,
Yes, sir.
okay, fine.
Yes, bro.
Okay. Is it better now?
Yes, bro.
Yes, sir. Okay.
Okay.
Yes, bro.
If you see here, just means you are having the table, right, in the database. For each table, we will create one repository. Okay. So my application is dealing with the customers. Okay. There will be customer table in the database for fetching the data or inserting or updating into the customer table. I have created one repository. Okay. So defining that repository, I need to extend this JPA repository. JPA repository is there from Spring Boot, Spring Framework itself. So I need to pass 2 arguments for the JPA repository. What are all those things? Okay, you are creating this repository, that is fine. But on which table I need to work? So the table name. So that's a customer table. Okay, then what is the primary key within that customer table? The type of the primary key, it is an integer. So generally the ID is there, right? So the ID is will take as a primary key. So based on that, it will provide all the default features, means creating, updating, deleting, fetching, all such kind of things will be provided by JPA repository itself. You no need to write any explicit code here. So that is the beauty of the Spring Boot. Yes. So that is the significance of the repository. The repository is the one which actually works on the database. So another thing we discussed is first database, then repository, then services, right? So where like business layer. So For different services, there will be service annotation should be there. Okay. So CAT service AMPL implements CAT service. This is the one which gets data from the repository. So I need to get repository here. So just by using the auto void, the dependency injection is fulfilled here. So I did not create any object here by using the new keyword. I just used auto void. That's it. The container within there in the Spring, it provides the object here. So we discuss, right? Through the metadata is the indication for the container. So that metadata can be in the form of XML, in the form of annotation, or in the form of like Java code. So here we have used a representation of annotation. So auto void. Auto void means here we are telling to the container that in this class, I need this CAT repository object. Okay. So by CAT to do implement method. So any kind of implementation I can do here. Do this CAT repository dot save means that will save as a new record. CAT repository dot get if you want to get something. CAT repository dot find by ID. So everything will be called by using the repository object. Okay. From the controller, the call comes to the service. The service uses the repository. By using the repository, it will get all the data and it will respond back to the controller. That controller respond back to the view or as a response, respond back to the client. So this is how the core components in the Spring Boot is like it is a production ready Spring applications. It will give for the building. And another is a Spring MVC. So it's a framework that is having the three main components: controller, view, model. So controller is controls application flow, view is the presentation layer, and model is this layer. Okay, another is the Spring Data. Spring Data is responsible for database related operations. So these are all the high level about the Spring Boot. Okay. So next week, I think one session or two sessions, we will see as a sample application. Okay. With the Spring Boot, like, means like creating one record into the database and see like whether that is getting created or not. So for the creation, like how I am using. So in the MVC controller flow, right? And Spring Data and all, how and all I'm using, what is its significance? I will explain in the practical more aspect level to use real time, like how it looks under. With that, like we will close our training. Oh, it's not good recorded. Huh? Shit. Oh, sorry. Chandrasekhar, like, can you stop recording?
Okay.
I thought I'm, yeah.